They took his eyes, but they could never take his purpose. Long before Samson stood blind and chained in a Philistine prison, his story began in a land buried in fear. For 40 years, Israel lived under the shadow of the Philistines, a nation conquered not only by iron swords, but by hopeless hearts. The Philistines ruled with weapons sharper and armor stronger, but their greatest power was control. Israel's courage had turned to silence, their faith to dust. Yet when man forgets God, heaven still remembers man. In the tribe of Dan, hidden among dusty hills, lived a man named Manoah and his barren wife. She carried no children, only sorrow. But God delights in beginning miracles where human hope ends. One radiant day, the angel of the Lord appeared before her, not in dream, but in blinding reality. His voice cut through the stillness. "You will conceive and give birth to a son. No wine, no razor, no unclean thing shall touch him, for the boy will be a Nazirite dedicated to God from the womb. Through him, Israel's deliverance will begin." When Manoah offered a sacrifice, the angel ascended in the fire and vanished into the smoke. The couple fell to the ground trembling, not in fear, but in awe. From a barren womb, God had begun his rescue. They named the child Samson, little son, a flicker of light in a nation swallowed by darkness. Samson grew under the sacred Nazirite vow, a covenant that set him apart. No wine, no touch of death, and no razor upon his head. These weren't rules. They were reminders that his strength would not come from himself, but from the Spirit of God resting upon him. From childhood, his parents told him, "You are chosen. You are called." And as he grew, the Spirit of the Lord began to stir within him, bursts of supernatural might, glimpses of divine power that no man could explain. He was destined to deliver Israel from its enemies, but calling is never protection from weakness. God gave him strength to shake nations, but not immunity from temptation. He could tear apart lions, yet not control his own desires. He could break chains, yet remain bound by pride. That inner battle between divine purpose and human weakness became the battlefield of his life. One day, Samson went down to Timnah, a Philistine city, and saw a woman whose beauty struck him harder than any sword. He returned to his parents and said, "Get her for me as my wife." They were heartbroken. "Is there not a woman among your own people?" They pleaded, but Samson insisted, "She's the one I want." It wasn't love, it was desire. And desire, when it rules the heart, blinds the eyes faster than any enemy ever could. On the road to Timnah, a young lion roared at him. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him mightily, and with his bare hands, Samson tore the beast apart as though it were nothing but cloth. It was a miracle, a warning, a glimpse of divine power. Days later, he returned and saw something strange. Inside the lion's carcass, bees had built a hive dripping with honey. Samson reached in, scooped the sweetness from death, and tasted it. It felt harmless, but it was the first fracture in his vow, contact with the dead, a defilement of what was sacred. He gave the honey to his parents, but said nothing of where it came from. That's how downfalls begin. Quietly, in small secret choices we convince ourselves don't matter. At his wedding feast, surrounded by 30 Philistine men, Samson let his pride take over. He posed a riddle based on the lion. Out of the eater, something to eat. Out of the strong, something sweet. A wager followed. 30 fine garments if they could solve it in 7 days. When they couldn't, they went to his bride and threatened her life. "Coax your husband into telling us, or you and your father will burn." Terror consumed her. She wept, begged, accused, and pleaded until Samson broke under her tears. He told her the answer. She ran to the Philistines and gave them his secret. When they came to him smiling, saying, "What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion?" Samson knew instantly. Betrayal. Fury burned through him. "If you had not plowed with my heifer," he said coldly, "you would not have solved my riddle." The Spirit of the Lord came upon him in rage. He went to Ashkelon, struck down 30 men, stripped them of their garments, and threw their blood-stained clothes at those who had mocked him. Then he left, furious, humiliated, and alone. But pride always writes its own tragedy. When his anger cooled, Samson returned to his bride, bringing a young goat as a peace offering. But her father blocked the door. "I thought you hated her," he said nervously, "so I gave her to your companion. But her younger sister is prettier. Take her instead." The words hit Samson like a blade. betrayed again, this time by the family he tried to reconcile with. And something inside him snapped. "This time," he said, "I have a right to get even with the Philistines." He caught 300 foxes, tied them tail to tail, fastened burning torches between them, and released them through the Philistine fields. Fire tore across the wheat and vineyards, the olive groves. Everything they owned turned to ash. The Philistines were enraged. They learned Samson had done it because his wife was given away. So they retaliated, burning her and her father alive. When Samson heard this, grief and fury collided. The woman he once desired, the one who betrayed him, was now dead because of him. In blind rage, he struck down countless Philistines, painting the ground red with vengeance. Then, broken and hunted, he fled to a cave in the rock of Etam, a man powerful in strength but powerless against his own anger. When rage becomes your master, every victory turns to ashes. The Philistines gathered their armies and marched into Judah, demanding Samson's capture. In fear, 3,000 men of Judah went to Samson's cave, not to protect him, but to hand him over. "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us?" they said. "What have you done to us?" Samson looked at them, his own people, and replied, "I only did to them what they did to me." But they were terrified of revolt. "We've come to tie you up and hand you over," Samson sighed. "Swear to me you won't kill me yourselves." They agreed, bound him with new ropes, and led him like a prisoner to his enemies. When the Philistines saw him, they shouted in triumph. But in that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him again. The ropes on his arms burned away like flax touched by flame. Samson reached down, grabbed the jawbone of a donkey, and charged. 1 man against 1,000. Each strike echoed like thunder. When the dust settled, the field was silent. 1,000 Philistines lay dead at his feet. He stood trembling, blood-stained and breathless. Then thirst struck him like a wound. His mouth dry, his body weak, the man who had slain an army was about to die of thirst. He cried out to God, "You have given your servant this great victory. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised?" And God answered. Water burst from the rock at Lehi, cool, living water flowing where there had been none. Samson drank, his strength returned, and he named the place En-Hakkore, the spring of the caller. That day, Samson learned something he would soon forget, that true strength isn't in muscle or might but in dependence. He could conquer armies, but only God could sustain him. Yet the lesson faded as quickly as it came. And far away, in the valley of Sorek, destiny was already waiting, not with swords, but with a smile named Delilah. Years passed, and Samson continued to judge Israel. His reputation grew, his legend spread, but his spiritual sight was fading. One night he went down to Gaza, deep in enemy territory, and spent the night with a prostitute. Word spread quickly. Samson is here. The Philistines surrounded the place and waited at the city gates, whispering, "At dawn, we'll kill him." But at midnight, Samson rose, tore the massive gates from their hinges, hoisted them onto his shoulders, and carried them to the top of a distant hill facing Hebron. It was a bold act of mockery, a show of strength against those who thought they could cage him. He could lift the gates of cities, but he could not lift the weight of his own desires. Pride whispered that he was untouchable, but pride always blinds before it destroys. In the valley of Sorek lived a woman named Delilah, and she would do what armies could not. Samson fell for her. Perhaps love, perhaps loneliness, perhaps the same old pattern of desire overruling discernment. The Philistine rulers saw their chance. They came to Delilah with silver, 1,100 shekels from each ruler, if she could uncover the secret of Samson's strength. It was enough money to buy her future forever. She agreed. That night she whispered against his ear, "Tell me the secret of your great strength. How could someone tie you up and subdue you?" Samson played with danger. "Tie me with 7 fresh bowstrings that haven't dried," he said. She did, and the Philistines hid in the next room. "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" she cried. He snapped the strings like threads touched by fire. They still didn't know. Again she pleaded, "You made a fool of me. Tell me how you can be tied." He said, "Tie me with new ropes never used before." She did. Again she cried, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" And again he broke free. A third time she tried, weaving the 7 braids of his hair into the fabric of a loom and fastening it with a pin. "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" He awoke, ripped away the loom, and walked out laughing. But Delilah was not done. She had a weapon more powerful than ropes or bowstrings: persistence. "How can you say you love me when you won't confide in me?" she said. "This is the third time you've made a fool of me." Day after day she pressed, nagged, and wore him down until, as the scriptures say, he was sick to death of it. Finally, exhausted, Samson told her everything. "No razor has ever touched my head," he confessed, "for I have been a Nazirite dedicated to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, my strength would leave me, and I would become as weak as any other man." Delilah knew the truth when she heard it. She lulled him to sleep on her lap, and while he slept, she called for a man to shave off the 7 locks of his hair. Then she cried out one last time, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you!" He woke, thinking he would escape as before, but something was terribly different. The most tragic line in his story followed. He did not know that the Lord had left him. The Philistines seized him, gouged out his eyes, bound him with bronze shackles, and took him down to Gaza, where he had once carried the city gates, and forced him to grind grain like an animal. The strongest man alive, now blind and broken, was reduced to a slave. Day after day he turned the grinding wheel, the same rhythm, the same humiliation. Philistine soldiers mocked him, spit on him, laughed as he stumbled. The man who once terrified armies was now their entertainment. But something unseen was happening in the darkness. Each turn of the mill became a prayer. Each step in the circle became a whisper of repentance. Each clink of the chain echoed surrender. His hair began to grow again, but that was not what truly changed. The strength that returned was not from his hair, but from humility. Samson was being remade, not by his parents' vow this time, but by his own surrender. The man who once saw everything with his eyes was now seeing clearly with his heart. The Philistines didn't notice, or maybe they didn't care. To them he was broken forever. To God he was just beginning again. The Philistines thought Samson's story was finished, but God was only beginning. In the darkness of the prison, the man who once tore lions apart and carried city gates now ground grain like an animal, blind and forgotten. His enemies laughed and mocked the God he once served, but they couldn't see what heaven saw. His hair was growing again, and so was his faith. Each turn of the millstone became a prayer, each step in the dark a moment of repentance. Samson, once bound by pride, was now being remade through surrender. The man who once saw everything with his eyes was learning to see with his heart. Far away, the Philistines prepared a great festival to honor their god Dagon, celebrating what they believed was their victory over the God of Israel. Thousands gathered in the temple, rulers and warriors filling every space, 3,000 more standing on the roof, watching from above. In their drunken joy, someone shouted, "Bring out Samson! Let him entertain us." And so they brought him from the prison, blind, stumbling, humiliated. The man who once carried city gates now stood between the pillars of their temple, mocked and jeered by those who once trembled at his name. But as the laughter roared, Samson whispered to the servant who guided him, "Put me where I can feel the pillars that support the temple so that I may lean against them." The boy obeyed, unaware of what was coming. Samson's hands found the cold stone, the very columns holding the entire temple above him. The noise around him faded, and for the first time in years, he prayed, not for revenge, not for glory, but for redemption. "Sovereign Lord, remember me. Please, God, strengthen me just once more." It was a prayer of surrender, not strength, a plea from a broken man who finally understood where his power truly came from. And God, who had never left him, answered. The Spirit of the Lord, silent for so long, returned like a storm. Samson braced himself, his arms outstretched, the last of his strength surging through him. Not the strength of his muscles, but the strength of his faith. "Let me die with the Philistines," he whispered, and he pushed. The pillars cracked, the stone groaned, and with a thunderous roar, the temple collapsed. The roof caved in, crushing 3,000 men and women, the rulers who had mocked his God buried beneath their own celebration. In his death, Samson accomplished what he had never achieved in his life, not through pride, not through power, but through surrender. He killed more in his final act than in all his battles combined. When the dust settled, silence fell over Gaza. The man they had mocked had become the instrument of divine justice. Samson's brothers came for his body. They carried him home and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol, in the tomb of his father Manoah. He had judged Israel for 20 years, but his legacy reached far beyond his lifetime. Because in the end, it was never about his strength. It was about the God who never gave up on him. Samson's story is both a warning and a promise. A warning about the cost of compromise and the power of pride, and a promise that even after our greatest failures, redemption is still possible. His blindness wasn't his end. It was the beginning of true vision. In the darkness, he finally saw what he had missed his entire life. That strength without surrender is weakness disguised. That power without dependence is a foundation built on sand. He spent years fighting enemies, but his greatest battle was always within, against pride, against lust, against the illusion that he could carry God's calling without walking with God. Only when he lost everything did he find what he had been searching for all along: peace, purpose, and the presence of God. Centuries later, his name would appear in the book of Hebrews among the heroes of faith, not because he was flawless, but because he surrendered. His final act foreshadowed something far greater. Another man, another sacrifice, another outstretched pair of arms defeating death through surrender. Jesus Christ, stretched upon a cross, turned weakness into victory just as Samson had done in his final moment. Samson's story points to a divine truth that God's strength is perfected in our weakness, and his glory shines brightest when we stop, pretending we have it all together and finally admit we need him. What if the moments you regret most are the very ones God can use to reveal his greatest strength in you? What if your darkest chapter isn't the end of your story, but the place where redemption begins? Samson teaches us that it's never too late. God can meet us in the prison, in the chains, in the grinding stone monotony of our failures, and still create something beautiful. Samson's journey went from strength to failure, from sight to blindness, from pride to surrender, but it did not end in defeat. It ended in redemption. Maybe you are in your own Gaza right now, chained by regret, blinded by shame, grinding through the same painful routines, wondering if God can still use you after everything you've done. Samson's story is your reminder that he can, that your past doesn't disqualify you. Your weaknesses don't surprise him, and the moments you thought ruined your purpose might actually be where his strength begins. God didn't abandon Samson when he fell. He met him in the darkness and gave him one more chance to fulfill his calling through surrender, the very thing pride had always refused. And he will do the same for you, because Samson's legacy isn't that he was strong, it's that he was redeemed. And that same redemption is waiting for anyone willing to surrender. So if you're grinding stones in the dark right now, remember this: your hair is growing back, your strength is being restored, and God is not finished with your story yet.